Okay, that's great. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to these decision days. And the days is a plural there, we need to note, of the Executive Member for Highways Operations, the Executive Member for Climate Change and Sustainability, and myself, the Executive Lead Member for Economy, Transport and Environment. So these decision days are being broadcast in one session live on the YouTube via the County Council website. Now, as you just heard me say, this is a session of 3 D-Days. So we have 3 Cabinet members that will have their own individual D-Days today. And I will be handing over the chair in a minute to Councillor Russell Oppenheimer, who is the new Executive Member for Highways Operations. And then we'll be handing over to Councillor Jan Warwick, who would chair that part of the meeting, who is the lead member for Environment. So I'm going to move straight on, if that's all right, only just to welcome everybody and all the deputies as well. What will happen when we get to the appropriate paper that you want to speak on, the chair at the time on that relevant paper will ask you to speak. So that's how the process will work. So welcome everybody, and I'm now going to hand over to Councillor Russell Oppenheimer to take through his decision days. So he is now the chairman. Councillor Russell Oppenheimer.
Thank you, Councillor Humby. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Executive Member for Highways Operations, and thank you for attending my virtual decision day today. Deputations, we've got 3 speakers for item 3, which is active travel. So they'll have 10 minutes each when we get to that item. So we'll start now, please, with item 1, procurement of new RTPI framework. I would like to ask the officer to introduce the item, please. And I think Andrew Wilson is here. Andrew, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this report deals with the County Council's real-time passenger information system for bus passengers. These are the electronic screens that you'll see inside bus shelters, at bus stops and bus stations around the county that tell people when their next bus is actually going to arrive over the next few minutes. We currently have over 500 screens around the county on the Hampshire bus network and at our bus stations, rail stations and so on. The purpose of this report is to seek approval to award and enter into a new framework contract for the supply, installation and maintenance of both the back office system and the on-street signs. The current framework expires in August this year, hence we need to enter into a new agreement. There are a number of funding sources for the new screens. So, for example, we've got considerable money coming in through the 2 Transforming Cities Fund schemes for Southampton City Region and Portsmouth City Region. We tend to spend Section 106 money coming in from developments on enhancing passenger infrastructure, including the real-time screens. And we expect to be able to enhance the system over the coming years on the back of the government's new national bus strategy. The framework will be for a period of 4 years, with an allowance for maintenance to be carried out on any new equipment for up to 10 years. As with the previous framework, a number of our neighbouring local transport authorities are named on that procurement, so they can purchase through the framework. So, for example, we've got Portsmouth, Southampton, Dorset, West Sussex, Isle of Wight, all named who can buy through our contract. The proposed maximum value of the framework is up to 16 million over the 4 years, of which we expect Hampshire would spend somewhere just under 4 million. We're also proposing that as and when other local authorities use the framework, there'll be an access charge on any orders placed. So it's proposed that the income generated through that will contribute towards the cost of running the system, the cost of running the procurement exercise that we're going through at the moment, and towards the operation and the maintenance of the system. What it also does is helps us build capacity within our staff and retain expertise of how to run these systems and do it on behalf of others. So moving to the recommendations, it's proposed that authority is delegated to the Director of ETE to enter into a new framework agreement for the supply and maintenance of the real-time passenger information system. And secondly, the authority is delegated to the Director to make minor amendments to the framework, including agreeing the charging mechanism to other local authorities. And that's it, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very helpful. At this point, I will just ask the opposition spokesperson, Councillor Todd, whether he wishes to make any comment on this Decision Day paper. Councillor Todd?
Thank you, Councillor Oppenheimer, for the chance to make a comment. This paper seems very sensible.
I can't hear you brilliantly, Martin. I don't know if the
sorry. No, I've done that. Is that better?
It is, thanks.
Yeah. No, I think our view is that this is a very sensible paper. Good quality information for buses has been seen in other places as being absolutely critical to improving bus uptake. The paper doesn't particularly set forward the objectives and the goals that we're aiming at. So I suppose I have a question. While I support the paper, it would be useful to know what our ambitions will be and whether that's something we'll see defined through the Bus Better work or through other work, because I think it is important that we keep thinking about how we keep moving ahead and stay in line with good practice and successful practice in other places.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Certainly, we do want to be at the forefront of best practice. I mean, one of the things that I like about this proposal for this new procurement framework is it does put Hampshire in a leadership position with other councils in the South East. I think that's a benefit to us. It generates goodwill. And I would like to ask Andrew whether he'd like to respond to that point, or Stuart Jarvis has put his hand up as well.
Chairman, if I can help, I mean, we wouldn't outline the objectives for the County Council's bus policy in this paper because this is about a mechanism for procuring the RTPI arrangements, and it would not be appropriate to do that. But kind of in the wider point, Councillor Todd's right that will form part of the County Council's Bus Better approach. And would be covered under another paper, but it certainly wouldn't be appropriate to include it in this report, which is simply about the procurement of a mechanism for securing the supply of these things.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew, did you have anything to add?
Yes, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I absolutely agree with Stuart. This paper is about the mechanism to enable us to deliver the wider rollout of this equipment. And of course, Councillor Todd's right. We've got we anticipate being able to extend this system as we have done over recent years using various funding sources. And we do set that out as part of the Bus Back Better approach. And we will be picking that up in the bus service improvement plan and the enhanced partnership proposals as they come forward over the coming months.
Yeah, well, look, that's been helpful. Thank you, Councillor Todd, for asking about that. Certainly there is a read across, and the RTPI framework will hopefully encourage more people to use the buses, which will have a climate change benefit. So I'm inclined, and if no one else has anything to say, I will move forward to the recommendation. So Katie, I would like to turn to the recommendations at paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 on page 5 of the report, and I accept those recommendations. Thank you very much. So we'll move now to item 2 on the agenda, which is on-street chargeable parking. And I'd like to invite Mark Samways to introduce this item, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a very brief report that merely seeks approval to restart the work previously put on hold for the continued development and implementation of on-street chargeable parking in a number of towns, town centre areas across the county. The report follows a previous decision made back in October of last year to delay this work in light of the impact of COVID-19 and the associated national lockdown and response phases. On-street chargeable parking, which is often referred to as pay and display parking, is a vital element of the County Council's project to modernise the on-street parking service, with the ultimate aim of delivering the function on a full cost recovery basis. It's very important important that the on-street parking service does not continue to draw money away from essential highways activity to meet its ongoing operational costs. Finally, I was just going to add that important to kind of emphasise that all chargeable parking schemes will be subject to formal consultation as part of the traffic order process. So, these schemes won't just kind of appear quickly, that there is a formal process to go through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I've got two county councillors who've asked to speak on this item. Firstly, Councillor Barry Dunning, are you on the call? Would you like to make a comment?
I am on the call, yes. We're talking about parking, I assume.
Yeah.
Okay. As you probably know, I'm on Lymington and Pennington Town Council. I'm also the Hampshire County Councillor for Boulder. And the Boulder Parish Council had a meeting last week as well. Very much not in favour of putting in parking restrictions in Lymington and that area. So we just want to register our dissatisfaction with it being brought onto this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I'll come back in a minute. I firstly would like to go to Councillor Todd to see whether he would like to make a comment on this item. Councillor Todd.
I had a comment and a question. I had to declare a non-prejudicial interest since I am the cabinet member for parking in Winchester, where we do have on-street chargeable parking. But I had a few questions, which is currently it is only framed in terms of full cost recovery. And I know that from being responsible for car parking in Winchester, that there are other factors that need to be considered. So firstly, how does the parking work with off-street parking prices? Since that needs to work as a system, and where appropriate, controlled parking zones and other such things. And secondly, an important emerging area, although admittedly mainly in areas where there's an air quality problem, is the question of emissions-based parking, and also what's now called net zero parking, offering discounts for people in zero carbon vehicles. And I suppose the third thing, which probably sits with the district, but again is something that in Winchester we consider as part of our parking strategy, is the role of bicycle parking. So I suppose my question is, are those going to be reflected in there? And obviously consultation and close working with local businesses is absolutely important. And I can't comment on that because I don't know the particular area. But if I think how we've defined our parking strategy, the number one objective is to ensure that our high street stays healthy, while at the same time cutting pollution, cutting congestion, these other factors that are supporting active travel. So I'm just slightly concerned that the parking is purely framed in terms of cost recovery. And I suppose my question is, how are you linking it to economic recovery, to cutting carbon, to cutting pollution, these other objectives, and integration with off-street parking, these other objectives that I talked about?
Thanks for that question, Councillor Todd. I think there is a link to our other transport work. I think I'll ask Mark to comment, and then I'll say something afterwards. Mark, do you want to come back on the question?
Yeah, I think, firstly, the important thing to remember is that this is, I think it's the 6th Decision Day report that we've had go through for the parking service and the wider parking project. There was a lot more detail on our proposals around on-street chargeable parking in earlier reports, but because this decision really was just, or the report was just seeking decision around kind of restarting the work that we'd already done, it didn't seem kind of appropriate to kind of revisit a lot of that historic information. But certainly picking up on some of the points that Councillor Todd has mentioned there, when it comes to kind of the charges for on-street parking, we would certainly look to align those, fairly kind of broadly with the off-street charges. What we don't want to do is to be, in a situation where we're kind of competing, with the kind of off-street parking. I think Generally the kind of on-street parking is for your kind of shorter term, quicker turnover of parking. Maybe it's a little bit more convenient if you've got something, heavier to carry. Whereas, your kind of off-street parking tends to be, longer term parking when you're there for a longer period of time. So that's what I would say on that. I mean, certainly in terms of kind of air quality, we're very kind of mindful, the kind of important part that parking has to play with regard to air quality. I think going forward, things like kind of emission-based parking and different kind of tariffs, maybe for different types of vehicles, would certainly be a possibility. But I think we have to get there gradually, and I think the first step is to turn the these kind of difficult to enforce limited waiting areas that are kind of currently free parking, but they're widely abused. We have situations where vehicles regularly overstay the maximum parking period. So I think it's about getting the schemes in on the ground to start with, and then building on that and refining those schemes over time. Oh, and then finally, sorry, there was another issue about cycle parking. Again, we will be liaising with the relevant town councils, parish councils, district councils with regard to that, and if there's scope to be able to incorporate cycle parking, certainly we would look to do that. I should say, though, generally we are talking about established on-street areas of parking that we would just look to convert to introduce modest hourly charges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Councillor Todd and Councillor Dunning. I do think that on-street parking can help and contribute towards our active travel agenda. It can encourage more people to walk and cycle because they'll think twice about driving. The point about turnover of cars benefiting the area, I think, is relevant and persuasive. I hear what Councillor Dunning is saying about the local concerns, the local opposition, as he put it. But I would say two things. Firstly, I think it's important that we restart this work now so that the progress can be made over the coming months. But nothing is going to happen immediately. It will take some time to develop the proposals. And secondly, I think it will be important, so I know Mark Samways will do this as part of his process. It will be important for the relevant county councillors to have a pre-consultation opportunity. So whether it's in Lymington or in Fareham, I think that it's important that happens. And of course, all concerns that come in during that process and during the traffic regulation order consultation will be taken into account. But given this is a T19 proposal that was stopped during the pandemic, I think it is right now to proceed and restart it. So I would like to turn to the recommendation at paragraph 2 of the report on page 11 of the pack. And Katie, I'd be grateful if you could minute that I accept that recommendation, please. Thank you, Mark, for your input there. Turning to my third and final item for today, active travel update. So firstly, I'm going to go to Ben Smith to give us a brief update. I know David Wilson is also here, but Ben, I'm coming to you first to introduce the paper, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As you can see from the report, there's 3 strands to this report. The first is on the school streets trial. Second is on workplace cycle parking grants and e-bike loans. And the third is on the emergency active travel measures. So if I just take each of those in turn and just very briefly do a summary. So the school streets trial, and that started life back with a motion to full council back in September of last year. It was considered by Cabinet in February of this year. And this report is recommending 3 schools where we do the school streets trial and 3 schools which are kept as control sites to monitor the impact. And essentially what that means is that the roads immediately adjacent to the schools will be closed off at collection and drop-off times to cars with access retained for emergency services, but for general car use will be closed off. So the recommendation there is 3 schools that's implemented at. The Workplace Cycle Parking Grant and e-bike loan is basically supporting local businesses to encourage cycling, providing grants for infrastructure for cycle storage and the like to encourage their employees to cycle, and providing access to loans of e-bikes. And the third element is the emergency active travel temporary schemes. And the recommendation on that is that in line with the government's roadmap for reducing and removing social distancing, step 4, that those schemes are all removed. And then there will be a second phase of this, which is scheduled to come to decision day in July, which is those schemes that were not about social distancing, but have some active travel elements that were consulted on earlier in the year, will be brought back with the results of that consultation for decision day in July. The recommendation on that, just to underline, is that all the measures that are in place temporarily at the moment are removed, with the exception of Winchester, which the removal is deferred to allow more monitoring of the traffic conditions, with them in place once other social distancing measures have been removed. And the final thing is about a presumption in support of people who may apply for tables and chairs to support their businesses and support their sort of economic kind of recovery of those types of businesses. So they're the 3 recommendations under that strand of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. David Wilson, did you want to add anything to what Ben said?
No, thanks. I might say that the director may want to add a slight amendment to one of the recommendations in terms of the step 4 of the roadmap, and a slight change of date, as everyone's aware of, because originally the government was planning to remove all social distancing measures from the 21st of June. So Stuart, do you want to add anything?
Thank you very much, David. Yes, Chairman, if I may, I would like to propose that we amend the 21st of June reference to the 19th of July, which is currently the government's date for the lifting of all social distancing measures.
Okay, this is at paragraph 7, I think, isn't it?
I believe so, Chairman, yes.
Okay, we can do that. Thank you, Stuart and David. We now have a deputation, so I'd like to ask Phil Gagg from Winchester Action on Climate Change if he could unmute, please. And you have up to 10 minutes, Mr. Gagg. Over to you.
Do you want me to switch the camera on as well or not?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Oppenheimer. It's great to have the opportunity to speak this afternoon. As you said, I'm from Winchester Action on Climate Change, and I'm chair of the Transport and Planning Group of Winchester Action on Climate Change. We are concerned that the level of global heating emissions from transport, both in Winchester District, which is 60% of the total there, and throughout Hampshire. So that's our particular interest in speaking this afternoon, our starting point, if you like. We welcomed the government's Emergency Active Travel Initiative, which was also called Tranche 1. The terminology is sometimes a bit of a forest, and we're pleased when they developed this into Active Travel Initiative Tranche 2. We were pleased when Hampshire County Council was successful in its bid for money from both initiatives. We hope Hampshire will be well placed to benefit from the government's forthcoming cycling and walking investment strategy too, and the new emphasis they expect from transport authorities on cycling, walking and public transport schemes in their local transport plans. So it's all looking good, but we are worried. Increasingly, it appears that the Department for Transport rewards those transport authorities that understand and enact their preferred policy direction. We feel that the proposals for the Active Travel Update report are at odds, seriously, with the expressed intentions of the Secretary of State. Just to remind you, the Secretary of State had more in mind when he announced the emergency active travel schemes than just reducing the spread of COVID-19. And the report assumes it's only about COVID-19. However urgent and important that was, in his introduction, he said, "We recognize this moment for what it is, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver a lasting, transformative change in how we make short journeys in our towns and cities." According to the National Travel Survey in 2017-18, over 40% of urban journeys were under 2 miles, perfectly suited to walking and cycling. Active travel is affordable, delivers significant health benefits, has been shown to improve well-being, mitigates congestion, improves air quality, and has no carbon emissions at the point of use. Towns and cities based around active travel will be happier and healthier citizens, as well as lasting local economic benefits. The government therefore expects local authorities to make significant changes to their road layouts to give more space to cyclists and pedestrians. Such changes will help embed altered behaviours and demonstrate the positive effects of active travel. I'm pleased to see that many authorities have already begun to do this, and I urge you all to consider how you can begin to make use of the tools in this guidance to make sure you do what is necessary to ensure transport networks support recovery from COVID-19 emergency and provide a lasting legacy of greener, safer transport. So that's much broader than simply social distancing. He has an eye on the future, and he's talking specifically about Tranche 1 schemes. We're surprised you are taking decisions about Tranche 1 schemes without any significant reference to your proposals for schemes under Tranche 2. As your application for Tranche 2 suggested, they were designed to follow on from Tranche 1. There is no suggestion that Tranche 2 schemes would have to make a fresh start. And we believe that having a gap between Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 is actually a misunderstanding of the Minister's intentions and will be very damaging for the success of the Tranche 2 schemes. And I repeat, it wasn't just about social distancing. There was a much bigger agenda. In Winchester, and what you said in your application for Tranche 2 was, in Winchester, for example, and you said this about all areas, but I'm talking primarily about Winchester, with implications for other areas. In Winchester, the successful pop-up schemes at North Walls, Jury Street, Hyde Street, and the Square will be made semi-permanent, and enhanced connectivity for pedestrians and cyclists will be achieved by delivering the top priority links identified in the LCWIP. Although the footway widening and contraflow cycle lane measures will reduce the amount of road space available to general traffic in some city centre routes, recent monitoring surveys suggest that following the introduction of pop-up schemes, journey times in peak hours in July were quicker than from the pre-COVID-19 period in January. As you know, the reallocation of road space to cycling and walking and traffic reduction are both very popular. Complaints are loud and have a disproportionate impact, but it's important to remember that they do not represent a majority opinion. A survey by Kantar in 2020, commissioned by the Department of Transport, found that 65% of respondents favoured the reallocation of road space, and that 81% of respondents living in the southeast favoured traffic reduction. by summarily curtailing tranche 1 schemes, you will be going against public opinion. The decision report does not include a climate change impact assessment on the grounds that the scheme is temporary. There should not be a ground for omitting an assessment, as many of the schemes may not be temporary. The Department of Transport regards the growth of active transport as a cornerstone of their decarbonisation strategy. Every journey made on foot or by bike is a cost-effective and significant way of reducing transport emissions. If the carbon assessment tool does not cover schemes like this, it should really be reviewed. We urge you to take a different approach. In our view, the tranche 1 schemes have been a great success, and despite the occasional strident and unrepresentative reactions, they are only a start. Tranche 2 will consolidate the first group of schemes, but it would be counterproductive to remove the temporary barriers before more permanent arrangements are in place. This can never have been the government's intention to create this hiatus. My comments have referred primarily to Winchester, but much will apply equally to schemes elsewhere, especially, and I know that groups in Petersfield and Romsey are very concerned. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, thank you, Phil Gagg, for your deputation. You've made a number of points. I just want to clarify that I'm not going to be making any decisions today on the tranche 2 of active travel proposals because they're still under development. But on the question of why there's a gap, there are operational reasons and there are benefits and drawbacks of this gap. But the operational reasons I'd like to ask David Wilson to expand upon for the benefit of the meeting. David.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, if you don't mind, if I just say, I'm really pleased that WINAC welcomed the T1 schemes and appreciate that they've been of value. So that's really positive and good. This report, as you appreciate, is simply removing these emergency schemes. And I think everyone was aware that we had to install 42 schemes at really short notice last year under quite a lot of pressure, and we had to use temporary materials. Some of these materials are unsightly and probably not suitable for use in the long term. The traffic orders, which are behind these plastic pop-up schemes, as we call them, were made under emergency temporary COVID legislation. And in most cases, the statement of reasons made reference to social distancing, and that was, their primary purpose. So the proposal, well, the government's obviously planning to end social distancing, and we therefore will remove these schemes, or subject to your approval, plan to remove these T1 schemes. But the package of T2 measures for Winchester and other towns across Hampshire will be brought forward, and that package will be brought forward to July Decision Day. I hope WINAC will be pleased with what they see, and that will contain active travel schemes, and these active travel schemes will propose use of better quality materials and materials better suited to our Hampshire towns. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Before I comment further, I'll ask the two county councillors who've asked to speak to comment. So firstly, Councillor Park, would you like to unmute, and I'll hand over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you regarding the removal of the emergency TRO, particularly in this case for Eastleigh's Market and High Streets. Whilst we can all agree that the emergency TRO should be removed once all restrictions are lifted, as the emergency will then be deemed to be over, and which is currently scheduled for 19th of July, I request that members support the introduction of an experimental TRO to take effect at the same time as the removal of the emergency TRO. EBC and HCC officers, I believe, have already identified this as an appropriate legal and most suitable way to allow for the road closure to continue. Allowing the road closure to continue will have a number of beneficial reasons for that. Firstly, we know that there is a significant level of public support for the scheme, and we believe this will be further demonstrated in the responses to the HCC consultation undertaken earlier this year and I understand due to be published in the decision day in July. It would also allow already planned summer events to go ahead, aimed at boosting the town's economic recovery, which is much needed following almost 16 months of COVID restrictions. It would allow local businesses with tables and chairs on the highway to continue to benefit from the extra space and make full use of the summer weather. And retaining the road closures when social distancing measures are lifted would provide an opportunity for a more fair comparison with pre-COVID conditions on footfall parking demand and to assess the economic impact of the scheme. To allow the Tranche 2 scheme to go ahead, which was subject to public consultation and has been designed in Eastleigh to enhance existing road closure, and to allow the roads to be reopened to vehicle traffic in future if necessary. I understand these funds have already been allocated and if unspent will be returned to the Department of Transport. And finally, but certainly not least, especially with regard to the squeeze on the council's budgets that we know is coming up, the costs involved, as well as the reputational damage to both HCC and EBC in reopening the roads to only close them again a short time later, seems unwise, to say the least, especially when there is only a couple of weeks or even a week between the current July 19th date and the decision date later on in July. That's what I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Park. I'd like to go to Councillor Todd next, please. Councillor Todd, can we ask you for your comment?
Thank you, Councillor Oppenheimer, for the chance to talk on this. So there are three elements to this. Obviously, as I think the seconder of the motion on school streets, I'm delighted that this is moving ahead, that the pilot is going to proceed, and I look forward to the pilot being successful and a plan for rolling it out more widely. Similarly, the e-bike and travel grant scheme. Congratulations to officers for securing the £150,000, and again, it seems like a sensible proposal. I also welcome the proposal to continue support for use of the highway for businesses, which has been highlighted as an ongoing opportunity. I think the bit where I'm and as a Winchester councillor, I'm also pleased that the proposal to continue at least until the end of September in terms of the Winchester proposals. I think the bit that I'm a bit puzzled by, that I need help on, is the end of lockdown is now the July 19th. The paper says that removal takes 3 weeks. And the decision day is only 10 days after the end of lockdown, which is on July the 29th. So in principle, a bit of careful phasing would say that where a scheme has an obvious successor, where it's a continuation in EATF2, the sensible thing is to continue without halting. And indeed, coming back to a point that Phil Gagg from WINAC mentioned, in several of the places, some of the proposals talk about effectively are framed within the EATF2 bid to government. They're written as if they're new proposals. Some of them are very explicit about being continuations of what's already in place. So, for example, the language we used in our EATF2 bid to the Department for Transport says, quote, "The scheme in Eastleigh will include the continuing closure of Market Street, High Street and part of Wells Place to motor vehicles." So we've effectively told the Department for Transport that we're not taking them out, that this is a proposal to continue. And the language, as far as Winchester is concerned, is very similar. And it would be useful to get perspective on the letter issued by the Department for Transport this week, written by Rupert Furness, which I think relates to some further active travel funding that is being made available during the course of this year. And there's quite a lot of punchy language about, it all has to be consistent with LTN 120. Anything that does not fundamentally alter the status quo on the road will not be funded. The need for segregation or point closures. And there's a point here about all schemes should be given sufficient time to bed in and for benefits to be realised before any changes are made. The DfT could claw back funding where schemes are prematurely removed. And I know that there are other authorities that, maybe because they frame the orders differently, so Portsmouth, for example, are not taking out their EATF1 schemes, as far as I'm aware. And that was from a conversation with their leader, because they believe the orders still have power. But so on this particular point, we have end of lockdown on July the 19th. We have a decision day on the 29th. We're saying removal will take up to 3 weeks in the paper. So my suggestion would be that where there is a successor to EATF1 as part of EATF2, that 3 week removal period is organised in such a way that the ones where there's a successor coming in are at the end of the 3 weeks end of things rather than at the 1 week end of things. And I have a question, which is, we've had this new communication this week as a county council from the Department for Transport, setting out a clearer vision of the kind of ambition that's expected for us. And so my question is what we're proposing to do in line with that new Department for Transport letter? So a request that we how we manage phasing and a reference to the letter.
I think on the phasing, it's very pleasing that you think that when I take a decision on the 29th of July, that phase 2 will instantly be able to go in. I don't think that's quite right. I think it will take a period of a couple of months to implement phase 2 from when the decision is made. But look, I'd like to ask David Wilson to respond to your point, but I'm conscious of time and my executive colleagues I know have lots of decisions to make. So David, could you respond to the two county councillors who've spoken, please?
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Do you mind I'll respond to Councillor Todd first in the wrong order, but it's clear in my mind. A few things to cover. One, that we have interpreted and have been given good legal advice in relation to the application of these emergency powers, and we're accepting that advice that really we don't want to leave them in place for a long period after the social distancing is removed. So we are proposing to take out these T1 schemes. I think the suggestion from Councillor Todd, which is quite logical and sensible, which is, why don't we take out the Winchester ones last, and that would give us a chance to transition over into ATF2 if there is a successor. It is difficult. If there is a scheme, the package of schemes that we put forward in that July decision day, there will be different materials. They may be a slightly different scheme, and I think it's very important that we give ourselves time to do it properly. And as I've said earlier, I think the materials used on the T1 schemes aren't ideal, and it's probably better if we get them removed sooner rather than later. So I hope that covers some of the points that Councillor Todd has raised. And if I can now respond to Councillor Park.
Yep.
I think Councillor Park was requesting and suggesting that we delegate powers to Eastleigh Borough Council to promote an experimental traffic order, which would see the continued closure of some of the streets in the centre of Eastleigh. My feeling is that would be really inappropriate, because it's important. We've already had one experiment. That experiment has run for nearly a year now under the T1 closures, and I think it's important that we do full analysis of that experiment, if I can call it that. We do full analysis of the feedback that's come through our extensive public consultation exercise, and that information needs to be fed to your next decision day in July so we can make some balanced and sensible decisions. I think what we are clear on is that we're keen to work with Eastleigh Borough Council going forward after July Decision Day with a view to working to support the regeneration or improvement of the town centre in any way we can. Thank you. Thank you, David. And thank you everyone for the comments. I've thought very carefully about this decision in the build up to this decision day, and I've listened to what has been said today. The deputation and the comments from the county councillors today have been on one side of the argument, but I'm aware that there has been a mixed response to the temporary pop-up schemes in Hampshire, and that there are people who will be happy to see the back of them. So I have to take into account all the different views. The one thing that I would stress is that we have learned lessons from the phase one in every part of Hampshire, and we have a much better idea about what works, and all of that learning is going to go into phase two. And I think it's important also to stress that active travel will be a core component of the local transport plan when it comes out later this year. And so all of the learning and all of the developing knowledge we have will feed into that too. So I'm also very pleased that one of my first decisions as an executive member relates to school streets, which is a scheme that I have a personal desire to champion in Hampshire. I think it's very important. And all three of the proposals in this paper have a climate change benefit. And I do accept Phil Gagg's point that we could have brought that out a bit more clearly in the paper, although it was mentioned. Turning to my recommendations on pages 17 to 18 of the paper. Katie, I would like to accept the recommendations starting at paragraph 2 and going all the way to paragraph 9. And yeah, I invite the team to proceed with all of those, and I look forward to my next decision day and seeing the proposals for the tranche 2 of the active travel, and I certainly look forward to the report on the pilot school street scheme. That concludes my decision day today, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending my decision day and hand back to the executive lead member, Councillor Humby.
Councillor Oppenheimer, Russell, thank you very, very much indeed, and well done on chairing your D-Day within this session and your first one. So extremely well done on that. So I'm now going to hand over to Councillor Warwick. I would just like to say at the very beginning, I think I introduced her as Exec Member for Environment. Her title should have been very clear. It should have been Exec Member for Climate Change and Sustainability, and I'm sure which she will make that clear at this point. So I'm now going to hand the chair back over to, Councillor Warwick within this session for her D-Day. Councillor Warwick.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Humby, very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I am indeed the Executive Member for Climate Change and Sustainability. Thank you for attending my continuation of this virtual decision day. We continue to be webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. So I only have one paper this afternoon, an important paper. It's item 4, and it is the Natural Capital Plan for Chichester and Langstone Harbours. Now, there are no deputations to this paper, but it is a very interesting paper that focuses on the work being undertaken by Southern Water to improve the environment and the water quality in these two areas of outstanding natural beauty. So I'd like to hand over to Simon Cramp, please, as the lead officer to introduce this paper. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to very briefly set out the purpose and content of the paper before you about Chichester and Langstone Harbours and the preparation of a natural capital plan. Work is being undertaken by a range of partners, including Southern Water, to understand the root causes of the declining water quality and damage to the natural habitats in both those harbours, to collaborate on the preparation of a natural capital baseline, and to ensure there is a clear vision in place to describe the condition of the environment in and around both harbours in 2030 and beyond. As a member of the Chichester Harbour Conservancy, Langstone Harbour Board, the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee and Southern IFCA, the County Council has an important role in the planning and management of the coast, helping to conserve its unique qualities and meeting the many challenges it faces. As many of you will know, the harbours are part of Hampshire's really heavily designated southeast coast. In addition to their importance for wildlife, they also have a vital role in supporting tourism, commercial fishing, shipping, recreation, and of course the local economy. However, in recent years, there's been increasing concern about the declining condition of the natural environment of both harbours, particularly the level of nitrates entering the waters. Climate change and other human pressures are also leading to a loss of biodiversity, and without action, those impacts will only accelerate. Faced with those concerns, the Conservancy and Langstone Harbour Board have worked with partners, including ourselves, to engage with the Environment Agency, Southern Water and others to improve the situation regarding discharges to the harbour and reversing the declining condition. To that end, Southern Water hosted a summit in May, on 21st of May this year, with the aim of developing a plan to improve the water quality and important natural habitats. The summit was attended by representatives from 16 national and local organisations, including the County Council. The summit confirmed that a coordinated and integrated programme of action, underpinned by collaboration and partnership, was required to tackle the urgent threat to the natural capital of the harbours. A natural capital plan for both the catchments and the harbours was identified as the best way forward to provide an integrated approach going forward. I'm pleased to say that Southern Water will now fund the delivery of the natural capital baseline and a follow-up meeting to consider and agree next steps, building on and strengthening those existing partnerships and projects. Given our role and interest in the planning and management of the coast, the recommendation is that the County Council continues its support for a collaborative approach with Southern Water and the other partners to develop that natural capital plan for both harbours, which will contribute to the County Council's climate change objectives.
Thank you so much, Simon. That's really helpful. Councillor Taylor and Councillor Todd, you're not down to speak, but I just wondered if you had any questions or points you wish to raise on this paper.
No, thank you.
No, I think my only reaction was this looks like an absolutely excellent paper with great partnership working, real ambition to do well by a very, very special part of the world where I spent many of my childhood years, and I'm absolutely delighted that it's happening and strongly support it. So well done to everybody who's got it to this point, I think would be my
no, I think it's a fantastic example of really good partnership working with the flood authorities, with Southern Water and both harbour authorities as well. So fantastic. Thank you so much, Simon, for that. So moving to the recommendation, this is item 2 on page 33. And Casey, I'm very happy to accept this recommendation. Thank you so much. That concludes my decision, and I'm happy to hand over to Councillor Humby.
Councillor Warwick, thank you very, very much, and well done to you on chairing your first D-Day in this session, so very well done. So now we're going to move on. So now I'm going to take the chair back in this session to go through the last papers in the agenda that I will now be chairing for my D-Day. So thank you for attending my virtual Decision Day. This Decision Day continues to be webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. So we go straight into the first agenda item on my pack, which is agenda item 5, Bus Back Better. And I think Andrew Wilson is going to be talking on this paper. Andrew, thank you.
That's right, Chair, thanks. Okay, so this report sets out the County Council's response to the government's first ever national bus strategy, Bus Back Better, which was published in March this year. The report sets out the work we need to do over the coming months to meet the government requirements set out in their strategy. So firstly, by the end of this month, we need to submit a statement of our intent to develop an enhanced partnership with our bus operators that will be in operation by April 2022. and we need to publish a bus service improvement plan for Hampshire by the end of October this year, which will set out our shared ambition with our operators to improve bus services in Hampshire. Our operators need to sign up to both of these documents, so it'll be very much a collaborative approach with them. So the National Bus Strategy was published in March, and the main policy themes centred on decarbonisation of transport and levelling up the economy, with £3 billion allocated to deliver the strategy nationally. We actually weren't offered an awful lot of choice by the government on the way forward. If we want to retain Coronavirus Bus Service Support Grant and Bus Service Operators Grant, and to be able to bid for any of the £3 billion that's been made available, we have to develop an enhanced partnership or go for bus franchising. What it is actually an opportunity for us to formalise our existing very strong working relationships with our operators, to bring in more funding and to grow the commercial bus network. The expectations from government as they're set out in the strategy are focused on speeding up buses through congested traffic, making bus services more reliable, making them more attractive, providing better bus stations and passenger infrastructure, simpler fares, seamless ticketing, more real-time information, and expanding the bus network to more parts of the county and to longer days of operation. So this report also sets out how we propose to work closely with our neighbouring local transport authorities where we have significant cross-boundary travel to work areas. So we're talking about areas like the Blackwater Valley, Portsmouth City region and the Southampton City region. It's worth noting that the National Bus Strategy is consistent with Hampshire's existing policies around climate change, carbon neutrality, and with the themes emerging from our work on the current Local Transport Plan 4. It's also consistent with our approach to the COVID-19 recovery, so keeping bus services running and helping with a green economic recovery. In terms of finance, the DfT have acknowledged that we are working to, or they've asked us to work to extremely tight timescales to deliver all of this. And they've made £100,000 available to each of the local transport authorities around the country to bring in additional assistance, and we've mobilised people on the back of that, and we're bringing in additional support, and that's underway. So moving to the recommendations. Firstly, that the executive member agrees the proposed approach as set out in this report. Secondly, that the executive member approves the start of us working with our operators to develop an enhanced partnership following the Department for Transport guidance. And thirdly, that authority is delegated to the director to prepare a bus service improvement plan, which will be reported back to the executive member in the autumn before being published by the end of October. And that's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And this is really exciting development from our point of view. What I would like to say about a little bit more about the partnership working. But first of all, I'm going to go to Councillor Todd. Councillor Todd, would you like to make any comments?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Well, first of all, obviously strongly support moving ahead towards an enhanced bus partnership and support the recommendations in the paper. There are areas where I have questions about the details, such as what the engagement exercise will be, and some of the questions about partnership working, because it isn't just local transport authorities that are putting money into buses. As you know, I declare an interest. I've, as a cabinet member for a network of park and ride buses in Winchester, but also like I believe Eastleigh and Basingstoke, we put money into buses in our area as well, and I think it will be important that those authorities that are doing that as a minimum, but actually preferably all of them, are actively involved. I think there is a question which I suspect it may be difficult to answer, but it's something we need to think about as a risk, which is that the budget consultation that has just gone out effectively targets or announces the option of £1.5 million cut from the £1.6 million that Hampshire contributes towards the transport service out of a total budget of £4.6 million, and whether that poses a risk going forward. And I suppose my request there, and maybe that's a question, a feedback into the budget process, is we need to make sure that any potential impact on the support that we get for central government is properly considered when that savings proposal is reviewed. So overall, I support this. I think it would benefit from scrutiny by the Environment, Transport and Economy Committee to understand the details, make sure that there's the depth of consultation that that committee might want to see, and that the partnership working extends widely enough. But in terms of what's written down, this is a very exciting opportunity. I think we've all been surprised at the ambition of the government's national bus strategy, and I welcome the chance for us to get behind it and take this as an opportunity to go beyond responding to a request from government to enthusiastically seizing the opportunity that government has presented us, and using this as a critical part of our carbon reduction plan, our active travel plan, our congestion and air quality improvement plans. There's an awful lot that this can be doing for the council's objectives, and I hope that we get strongly behind this and that Mr. Wilson gets the resources he needs to do a fantastic job on it.
Thank you, Martin. And as you know, welcome the opportunity to discuss these issues with you in full. Andrew, just want to comment on the points that Councillor Todd makes in terms of the funding and the resources there. Then I'll just make a few comments after that. Thank you.
Okay, I think in terms of the resources, we're mobilising already. We've taken the 100,000 that was offered to us by DFT to bring in additional resources. So we're shifting around resources internally. We're bringing in some additional help from the Enterprise M3 LEP, and we're going out to recruit a further post that can work on this full time. So we're moving ahead with that already. There is an awful lot of work to do. We're meeting already with our bus operators regularly. We're meeting already with our neighbouring authorities to work through those issues for travel to work areas where we've got a lot of cross-boundary movements, where buses operate into and out of the cities in particular and through the Blackwater Valley. So that dialogue is ongoing. In terms of working with, for example, with Winchester City Council, we know that this could well yield opportunities around zero emission buses. Part of the national bus strategy includes the zero emission bus regional area scheme. And so that's an opportunity, for example, to work with Winchester on that. Could we see zero emission buses on the Park and Ride, for example? So we know that Winchester, Basingstoke and Eastleigh, amongst others, Gosport as well, put a little bit of money into subsidising bus services. So as we move forward over the coming weeks and months, we absolutely will engage with the districts fully. We're still trying to understand from DFT exactly what the requirements are in terms of consultation. They have told us in the guidance already that we need to consult with stakeholders, with users, with local businesses, and we're currently devising a way of how best to do that. But certainly we will fully engage the districts within this process.
Have you finished? Sorry.
Yeah, the only other one was around the savings proposals and Councillor Todd's mention of potentially losing some of our bus subsidy budget. I think that's an issue that we've got to deal with. I almost wonder whether that's separate to taking forward the work on Bus Back Better. That's almost, it feels like an internal issue, and this is about the bigger picture of how we can grow bus patronage, expand the commercial network, make it much more attractive and capture those benefits, and it kind of get into this cycle of growth where that can expand the bus network commercially and reduce the impact on our budgets going forward to subsidise the network.
All right, that's great. Thank you very much. And Councillor Todd, just to sort of reassure you, when this was first announced and it's about partnership working, and Andrew's covered some of that, I think I met with officers that day. We had a further meeting the following day, and we met all the bus operators the day after that, within that first week, in those first 3 days. So we were on the front foot. We put together and devised that we definitely want to work in partnership. We have an excellent working relationship with our bus operators. And during the course of the end of that week, I made contact with my colleagues at Portsmouth, Southampton and the Isle of Wight to make sure that we were joined up and have this one voice and one approach So we have worked very hard initially, and we want to continue to do that. So it's just that reassurance that we're doing that. And I completely agree with you. This is very exciting, and we need to make sure we get all the benefits we can for the whole of Hampshire. So I hope that addresses some of your concerns. I don't have anybody else that wants to speak, so I'm very happy to accept the recommendations, Katie, as set out on page 43. Thank you very much. Okay, so we will now move on to agenda item 6, household waste recycling centres and operations. And I think I have Paul Laughlin to open and speak, please, Paul.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Thank you. So this paper discusses a number of issues relating to the operations of the household waste recycling centres and restrictions that have been imposed as a consequence of the pandemic. A number of recommendations, so I'll try and go through them as swiftly as I can.
Yeah.
Firstly, it is recommended that the booking system is retained for a further period. Introduced primarily as a COVID response to address the severe queuing issues immediately seen when the HWRCs first opened after lockdown last year, it has also demonstrated definite operational advantages by spreading customer demand across the day and allowing site managers to better plan bin changeovers to cause minimum disruption. Officers have received a number of unsolicited compliments from customers who find the booking system more convenient, as they can plan visits with confidence that they will not have a long wait. There are also obvious carbon benefits through reducing journeys and cutting emissions from idling engines while queuing. As the government's roadmap progresses, we anticipate that site capacities will be able to be increased with barriers removed, along with the potential for allowing more than one visit per week. Retaining the booking system will help facilitate this transition. Secondly, and following on from previous discussions at the Decision Day in December, it is recommended that 2 trials are undertaken to evaluate options for reintroducing non-vehicle access in a safe and controlled way. For pedestrians, the risk of walking into sites through the vehicle entrance remains and cannot be overlooked. It is recognised, though, that some customers are unable to access HWRCs in a vehicle. Therefore, the previous recommendation to trial a dedicated pedestrian access period has been extended to include 3 key locations, namely Alresford, Hedge End and Waterlooville, where residential areas are close by. It has also been extended to 6 months to allow full evaluation of its success for a decision on future rollout, although it should be noted here there remain a number of sites for which walking in would never be an option due to their location. It should, however, be stressed that this process is only possible with the retention of the booking system to facilitate those fixed periods when pedestrians may enter safely. The booking system is also integral to the supplementary proposal to readmit cyclists on a controlled trial basis. As legal road users, it's recommended that bicycles may visit any of the 24 HWRCs, but they would have to book a slot in the same way as a vehicle user. The report finally recommends the implementation of 2 decisions previously taken which had been delayed due to the pandemic. A decision taken in October 2018 recommended the introduction of a £5 cross-border charge for non-Hampshire residents, and it is proposed that this is now implemented from the 1st of September. Please note this policy largely applies to out-of-county residents in the north and west of Hampshire, as agreements have been reached with other neighbouring authorities. Furthermore, it is recommended that glass banks are removed from HWRCs by the 1st of July, in line with the decision taken by yourself in October 2020. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. We have a few speakers today. I think you said earlier, Katie, that Yvette Riley, Samantha Darling weren't able to join us.
Yes, that's right. So our first deputation is Councillor Isaacs. Yeah.
I will just say that I want to thank them for the work and the interest that they've taken in this as well. So hopefully we can feed that back to them, even though they couldn't join us today. So the next person I have to speak is Councillor Fiona Isaacs. Fiona, are you there?
I am. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Is that all right?
Yeah, fine. Thank you. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'm delighted to be speaking today, and that the pedestrian access trial for Alresford Recycling Centre has been planned and announced. fingers crossed that it can go ahead without any issues. This has been an issue very close to my heart since the very first lockdown, and I'd like to thank Councillor Humby for the patience and listening to the Alresford residents that I originally represented as a member of the public, and obviously since then have been elected as Winchester City Councillor for Alresford and Itchen Valley Ward. I live near the recycling centre, and the local residents around me walk there regularly, or used to walk there regularly. So this was an important community aspect that we got this back, and I'm delighted that we've managed to find a safe way of moving forward with that to allow people who don't have vehicles or are able to drive, that they have the ability to actually use the recycling centre that is a very much loved and used centre in Alresford. It's a very much, everyone's very passionate about this site, and there'll be lots of groups that basically will support this. The booking system, I understand, has to be in place, and that's the condition that you've put in place. And it's a 50-50 split how people feel with that. Some love it, some not so keen. But at the end of the day, the fact that we have access for the bikes, and this is a way forward, the fact that we have pedestrian access to the site, and this is a way forward. To be honest, this is rather something that we desperately want and need. So we're thrilled that actually this has been included, and I can't, on behalf of our local residents, thank you enough. A lot of people were locally were in the quandary and a lot of trouble actually when the garden waste bins came in, and they couldn't get access to the tip that they used to be able to have, and were left either to buy a bin or to burn. And some people burn, and they couldn't afford to do that. So hopefully, as people get back to using the tip in a managed way, we will see a more uniformed, sensible way. It's better for the environment, obviously, that people aren't actually using cars. Alresford is quite different to some of the other centres, is that it's people, there's a mixture, has been a mixture of walking and driving. So it's not something that's, it's not a hugely busy site, which I know there are some other areas that are, and that can be an issue. The only question was, that I promised I would ask, and that is, as the restrictions ease with lockdown easing, does this mean that as part of the trial that the option for more than one visit, particularly for pedestrians, would increase? That's the question I'd like to ask, if that's okay. Or would it be still one visit per week, regardless of for a 6-month period? So I'd just like some clarity on that. And in relation to the disabled or people that would come down on mobility scooters because they couldn't quite walk that far, would they come under a bike or would they come under a pedestrian? If I could have some clarity on that, that would be really helpful. And just really to say thank you very much. Appreciate the support that you've given to Alresford on this, and I look forward to the outcome of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll come to Paul in a second, and the 2 questions about the 1 week per visit and the disabled access. But I would like to say thank you very much for your support as well, and the nice comments you've made about that. I would just also like to point out that the sites originally, well, obviously, were designed for the large, bulky items. So it's just worth remembering that when we talk about people visiting the site, and what your bins are for that other additional waste as well. So that just sort of sets a bit of context about what those sites are for. Paul, would you like to comment, or I see James as well, in terms of the frequency of the visits and then the issue around the disability scooters?
Thank you, Chairman. I think in terms of frequency of visits, specifically for pedestrians, what we are suggesting is that there will be an hour at the start of 3 mornings a week where they would be able to come in. There wouldn't be a booking system specifically for the pedestrians. We are using the booking system to make sure that vehicles are not able to come in in that period, so that there wouldn't necessarily be a restriction on pedestrians using that, but obviously we wouldn't want to see that abused by anyone in particular. In terms of other vehicles going forward, as I mentioned, hopefully that's something that we can look at as we're able to relax measures with social distancing going forward and remove the barriers and things like that, which might give us the opportunity to have more spaces. With regards to mobility scooters, I would suggest that they would be included with the pedestrian air time, so they would be allowed to come in during that hour period. Obviously, mobility scooters, or some of them, are legal on the road as bicycles are, but equally would understand that some of them would not wish to come in that period because they may feel safer to come in through the pedestrian time. So I think that would be the recommendation we would make.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. And we need to remember that this is a trial, and clearly we'll gather the data from that to see how we go forward from that. So thank you very much, Councillor Isaacs, for your comments as well. Much appreciated. Okay, I don't think, Katie, we have Councillor Tom Thacker, do we, as I understand? No, we don't. Okay, so I'm now going to go to County Councillor Kim Taylor. Kim?
Thank you very much, Chair. Really, I'd like to address my comments mainly onto recommendation 5 in the report, which is about the retention of the booking scheme. And I'm being a bit parochial and putting a Basingstoke view, particularly Basingstoke Central view on this. In that, what I'm really going to ask you to consider is that any decision to retain the booking scheme either excludes Basingstoke or includes a condition that the nature of the way the booking system operates in Basingstoke is changed to suit the circumstances that we have in Basingstoke. And to support that, I'd like to say that actually we do have a bit of a problem in Basingstoke in terms of waste. Our current facilities are not really sufficient to meet demand, even really before the pandemic, let alone since the pandemic, social distancing and the reduced access necessarily caused by the booking system. We are at the moment in Basingstoke experiencing massive amounts of fly tipping. Some people have even referred to it as a new pandemic in Basingstoke. It's really very, very bad. Most of the bring centres that we have are being excessively fly tipped, and I'm not talking about things that people could put in their bins to recycle. I'm talking about the bigger, bulkier items that people would normally go to the tip to dispose of, things like bits of carpet, mattresses, bigger items, bigger boxes, and so on. It's really very excessive, and I wish I could show you on screen some of the dreadful pictures. I mean, just for example, 2 days ago in the Winklebury Bring site, a whole dust cart full of fly tipping was removed, and that does not include the general fly tipping that's happening in the environment as a result, and it's not commercial, it is very much domestic. So we are experiencing a real problem because there is this lack of access, and just to sort of give a sense of proportion of this is that, I mean, I personally have been using the Winchester facility because it is so much easier to get a booking. If I want to get a booking in Basingstoke, I've literally got to, sit there refreshing the screen every 5 minutes to try to get a booking, or I've got to be prepared to camp out on the telephone. Now, that might be an option for me if I'm working from home, but it is not an option for a lot of our population in Basingstoke who are key workers. They work in hospitals, they work in retail. We have a very high retail rate, and these people do not have access to the computers, are often not allowed access to their smartphones, and by the time they get home, the telephone booking system has closed. So they're not, so there's a very, very large proportion of our residents not able to access the booking system, and I think this is causing some problems. We also, by the nature of some of our housing estates, have housing where people are not able to contain or store for long periods of time their rubbish that can't go into their normal bin or their recycling bin, and that too is giving rise to increased fly tipping, rats, and all sorts of other problems as well. I mean, I know from my personal usage that Winchester is nearly twice the Winchester facility is nearly twice the size of Basingstoke, and yet Basingstoke facility has to service Basingstoke and Deane with a population of 182,000 versus Winchester's population of 116,000. So clearly there is a mismatch in demand, and we do need more facilities in Basingstoke. The booking system as it is not working well because, I say, a lot of people are excluded from being able to use it, and because there are not enough sessions available. Just before this meeting started, there were only seven half-hour slots with any availability between now and next Wednesday. So it's very, very difficult to get a slot. We as borough councils, we have had postbags full of complaints about the system. But to be fair, I did ask one of my borough councillors who are in my division to do a social media survey in the last couple of days, and with 70+ responses, the feedback that was given was that if you could get a slot, it worked very well, because you didn't have to queue. So the queuing element, if you can get a slot, works well, but that it is very difficult to get a slot, and you have to wait for a very long time, and that often one slot a week, particularly during gardening growing season or something, is not sufficient. And so it is becoming a real problem. There are the good points, as I say, about not having to queue and the traffic problems if you just turn up on spec. But the real difficulty is not being able to get those slots. From my own observation and from reports from other people, most people will say that when you turn up for your slot, it's nearly empty. And part of that problem, even though the slots are not available, and part of the problem is those are half-hour slots when probably most people are in and out in under 10 minutes. So increased capacity could be done by having 15 or 20-minute slots, and we do need to make sure that the booking system, the telephone, because the only way really to book is via the telephone, because nothing is available online. That needs to extend to maybe 8 o'clock at night for those people who can't access it during the day because of work commitments. So really I'm asking for some slack to be given to Basingstoke, because it does have this capacity problem, or for some very significant changes to the way in which the booking system operates for us. Thanks very much.
Okay, so a lot of points there, and I'll ask officers to address some of them. I have to say, I get far more emails how well the system is working as opposed to not. But I think I also, at this stage, probably ought to remind Councillor Todd as well, and you, Councillor Taylor, that you're here as the opposition spokesman, not necessarily for Basingstoke and just Winchester. It's the whole of the county that you are here to represent. So it's just worth making that point. We've heard a lot about Basingstoke and Councillor Todd about Winchester. So, and I understand some of those issues that you say, but I think we do need to correct some of that, because a half-hour slot isn't one person for that half an hour. There are slots within that half an hour, so there are a lot more than that. So I don't know who wants to pick that up. I don't know if Paul or James want to pick that up. And Councillor Todd, I'll come to you in a minute to make comment.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up some of those. I mean, I think from the Basingstoke angle, we do know that, prior to the pandemic, it's the busiest site in the whole of the county, traditionally getting about 18,000 tonnes per annum. So we know there was a lot of demand going through there, and certainly when we reopened after lockdown, Basingstoke was the one that we were getting the worst queues at, the most amount of demand coming through, and certainly was one of the places that was really asking for the booking system, because the queues were stacking back along Wade Road and causing real problems for the local businesses. And I spoke to several people from those businesses who just couldn't get to work or couldn't operate in that time. The Basingstoke site, we've recently, as I mentioned, we've been looking at ways in which we can open up the sites to allow more spaces, and Basingstoke actually is one of the sites that we have just started a trial at, where we have relined the spaces and actually removed the barriers in the last week. Anecdotal feedback from site staff and from customers is that it's worked well. They've been able to get more spaces into the site, and we're working on a progressive basis with the site to see how we can increase those spaces. So you may well see a benefit on that in the next few days. I think In terms of not being able to get spaces, it's kind of a double-edged sword. We can open up and give people more than one visit per week, but at the same time, for those busy sites like Basingstoke, Sedgensworth, Efford, that means potentially more people booking up those slots and there being less availability for the people who can't get through. So it's something we need to monitor very carefully to make sure that everyone is getting a fair opportunity. And certainly for the busier sites, that one visit per week is the fairest way of doing that at the moment. The final thing I would add is that I think that one of the benefits of the booking system that we have seen is that by reducing the number of journeys, people are making a decision on what they can take to the tip and what they're storing when they go through. So people are filling up their vehicles to take more in one go. That sometimes means they're going to be there for more than a couple of minutes, but actually they're thinking about what they want to take. And ultimately it comes through to waste prevention as well, and getting all of us, we will have a duty to think about what we throw away and whether there are other options like reuse and using local charities. I know, for example, that a lot of the local charities are crying out for material after lockdown for troubled families and people in sheltered accommodation, and all that sort of furniture. It's an ideal place for that to go rather than taking it to the recycling centre.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'm just going to let James come in. James Potter, you wanted to comment? You've got a hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It was really just to make the point that we recognise that, shall we say, Basingstoke is a growing area and that at the moment it is potentially underserved by capacity. However, we have been continually working with the sort of borough officers over the last 4 to 5 years to try and find alternative sites. And as yet have not been able to do so. However, we recognise that with sort of the potential for many down coming on stream, etc., there is likely to be a need for a new site somewhere, probably to the west of the sort of the town, but as yet an unidentified site. So we will continue to work with the district officers and borough officers to try and identify a location and put that into our forward plans.
Thank you, James. And Councillor Taylor, absolutely understand and acknowledge the points that you make. I would just like to say that the whole team, the officers, have worked extraordinarily hard to get as many people through our sites as we possibly can. But it was quite right, as Paul said, we have more issues in your area, as you said, Basingstoke, now I've said it, in terms of the queues that we had and the danger we had, and then discussing it with the police how we could manage that. So that's one reason why we had to put it in. Like always, there's two sides of the story with the residents and the business isn't there. But I thank you for the comments that you make and acknowledge those. And we will clearly work, as you've heard James says, very closely with the colleagues in the Borough Council as well to try and increase those rates as much as we possibly can. So I thank you for your comments. Councillor Todd, would you like to make comment?
Indeed, I'm very happy to make comments. I'll probably apologise for the fact that 2 out of the 3 HWRCs that are due to have pedestrian access are actually situated within the Winchester district. I'll let you actually,
that's all.
But actually, I'd like to start. I made a point of consulting with colleagues right across the county because the first people I spoke to about HWRCs in some places were very much, oh, we don't like it, get rid of it. But when I went and consulted across the county, what became clear is actually the picture is very varied. And some places it's been a great success and people feel that it's much more positive. However, there is one metric that has not been talked about in terms of our household waste recycling centres so far today, and that is how much household waste recycling they're doing. And let's face it, that's probably quite an important criterion because that's what they're there for. They're there as part of the overall household recycling infrastructure. And don't get me wrong, it's not a problem if people start, recycling through other routes. And I know that one of the reasons for the glass recycling proposal is that, for example, Winchester has introduced a very successful doorstep glass recycling system, which has taken our recycling to record levels. We're now the 2nd highest in Hampshire, from being the 3rd highest, and one of the few authorities to have grown in the last 12 months in terms of its recycling levels, and grown much faster than the county as well. But there is a real issue here, which is the purpose of household waste recycling centres is to support recycling. And I'm concerned that overall system performance is going backwards and household waste recycling performance is going backwards. And indeed, a figure I've been told is that we're looking at about half the amount of recycling compared to what it used to be before. That's a very serious issue because we should be trying to recycle more. But we also need to be flexible. I mean, I support the fact that we're having a trial of pedestrianisation. I hope we're flexible. I hope if we see it working, we find ways to extend it. I welcome the fact that there will be a trial of cycle access. More and more people have cycles suitable for carrying large loads, and that needs to be supported. But there was a point made that I think needs to be thought about also in terms of the booking system, which is, it was rightly said that not every site is suitable for walking. And one question for consideration is whether every site is suitable for a booking system. And I'm particularly concerned that there's the point that Councillor Taylor made about the point of access and how some people with poor digital access, either because they're not allowed to use it during their working day or because they don't have access anyway, may end up being digitally excluded from the service. But I think there's a wider point. And there's a second concern I have, which is, again, as is always the case, the new budget consultation talks about household waste recycling centres having a savings target of 1.7 million out of the total budget of 10 million. And I'm concerned that maybe some of the less used ones may end up being, shall we say, tipped under the edge in terms of their viability, because we've put too many barriers in place for people to use them. So I suppose I have a couple of questions or a couple of requests on the recommendation. One is take building capacity for people who are coming via, whether by car, bicycle or on foot, as seriously as any other changes that we're trying to put through. And if in places that requires a transition for those sites where that would be the views of people to removing the booking system, then consider doing that would be my request. And what I would also ask is take the level of recycling that is going through our HWRC system within the context of overall recycling as a really important metric, because it was hardly mentioned in this paper. In fact, I'm not sure it was mentioned at all, but that's what they're there for. Mm-hmm. So what I would ask is that we do not lose sight of the core purpose of a household waste recycling centre, which is to improve our recycling rate. And I'd like that to be more strongly reflected in the plans going forward, and to be a metric that's looked at and a driver of innovation in places like Basingstoke, so that we get them back to 18,000 tonnes a year, whatever it might need to be, versus where they are today, particularly if it seems, as Councillor Taylor made clear, that it's a vital part of the local recycling infrastructure.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll come to Paul or James in a second. We go back to the original point, and you and I discussed this many times, and the overall is to actually get people to produce less waste, and clearly that must be the driver. And then we need to make sure when we're looking at the tonnages that we are comparing apples with apples here on how things have changed. James, you wanted to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to sort of come back to Councillor Todd on some of his points, I think the original purpose of what we now call household waste recycling centres, or were previously known as the tips or the dumps, and as set out in statute, are for facilities for local residents to dispose of their bulky waste. And so they have been rebranded to be recycling centres to encourage people to segregate and for the site staff to segregate. And there are, shall we say, thoughts and innovations that we could increase recycling were we to require complete segregation by residents, i.e. not to bring stuff in mixed black bags and throw them into the residual containers, but actually to separate them out and put them in the appropriate container, be that paying for the soil and rubble element or for the wood or for the cardboard or whatever that might be. So, we are recognise that, so we say, over the course of the pandemic, the performance on recycling has decreased. There are a number of reasons for that, including the diminishment of markets for some of those materials whilst they closed down during the pandemic. And so we have been sort of endeavouring and working hard with our contractor to recycle as much as we possibly can, and hopefully as we emerge from the pandemic we will recover the recycling rate to the levels that it used to be, and potentially even go further than that. So those were some of the points. I think yes, we've sort of taken a decision hopefully sort of shortly to the booking system. We will evaluate that, and I think as part of what we want to do some sort of further customer survey work to understand both the sort of the appreciation or not of the booking system and any geographic issues that may arise from that. So we will undertake to do that during the course of the next trial, or the sort of the period that the booking system is being agreed to be retained for.
Okay, thank you, James. And I've listened to, as I say, to both the comments from both the opposition members and understood those. Some of those I think we have addressed. Councillor Todd, I take your points, and as clearly as you've heard James said, there are some issues there we can think about, but we do need to remember what that provision was for. And I'm very keen, as I say, comparing like for like when we look at those challenges. So I don't have anybody else further to speak. I don't think, Katie, has it changed? No, okay, that's great. So having considered that, I am happy to accept the recommendations as set out on page, I think it's 55 and 56, Katie? Yeah, that's great. And thank you to Paul and James for your input and help with that paper. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're now going to move on to agenda item 7. And I need to make a point about this paper. So in the course of fairly early this morning, I had some conversations with the leader of the council discussing this paper in terms of the decision that we're discussing, if you look at the recommendations in 4, was previously taken from him at the Policy and Resources P&R Committee on the 29th of July. And you'll see that had a deadline date on it when the support would finish on the 31st of July. Now, he has since requested more information and also to have further discussions with, I think, the Borough Council as well. So what I have decided to do, and I apologise to anybody that was going to speak, I think it was Councillor Taylor, so apologies to you, but you were here on a previous paper. I am not going to take that paper today. Wait for that further information, and probably suggest, when I've had discussions with the director, that this paper could potentially then go back to P&R committee as the decision we were taking was in there in that recommendation 4. So unless Stuart, you want to make a comment, and just check probably with Susie from legal that that is something that is correct and I've said all the right things there. Stuart?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I can confirm that the substantive decision on this matter was taken 12 months ago by yourself when the provision for the subsidy for West Berkshire use or access to the West Berkshire site was removed from the base budget, and the policy decision was made by you in line with the council's savings programme from T17 for that to happen. Subsequently, representation was made to the leader to extend the provision for a temporary 1-year period to allow the county council to evaluate the possibility of 2 sites being opened, of 2 potential sites for a new HWRC in that area, and that was the basis on which the scheme was extended. As you say, Chairman, that funding comes to an end at the end of July, so in the absence of a positive decision by the county council, the scheme funding will come to an end. I understand that the leader has requested further consideration of that, and given that any extension of the funding would need to come from the P&R budget, it seems appropriate that that decision should be reverted to the executive member for P&R to take, and he has 2 decision days coming up in July. I think the latter one would be suitable for the paper to go in that direction. Should that be your final decision, it could of course come to your decision day at the end of July as well as a possibility, and that would still be within the time that the funding's there. But my understanding, Chairman, is that it would revert to Executive Member P&R, given that that was the previous decision on the funding was made by him.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. Can I just confirm with Susie Hinman, that I'm using the right terminology in terms of not accepting the paper or taking the paper today, because I'm not actually deferring it as such, am I? I just want to make sure I've got the process right, Susie.
Thanks, Mr. Humby. Yes, I think you have. Just noting what Stuart's just mentioned there, though, the fact that it be deferred to your decision day in end of July and still be within the timescales. I just wonder if this is actually a deferment pending those conversations and perhaps a decision from P&R, or if you are just not taking the decision today. I think both.
Okay, so just going back to you then, Stuart. So I just need to be very clear whether that is those two options are okay to do that, or do I have to, what are we going to write on the report sheet, whether it's a deferral or passing over to P&R? I just need to be very clear about that. So, I mean, that's probably one for you again, Susie. I think I slightly misunderstood, but you said we've got two options there, and I'm not quite sure what that actual option is now.
My apologies. I think from what Stuart was saying just then, that deferral is still an option if you wanted to do that. So not take the decision today, or simply not take the decision.
Mm.
Is that clear?
Yes, thank you. Not sure it's helpful, but it's very clear.
Yeah, so I think you could not take the decision today, and it doesn't preclude that being put back onto the agenda in July. So I think that is your decision. I apologise if I've caused the confusion. It was merely to point out that in the event that it was determined that you wish to take the decision after further consideration, that would still be an option. But I don't think it's a deferment. I think it is a no decision today.
Yeah, and that leaves the option open to do either. Sorry, Susie, I get what you meant. I apologise. I just needed to be clear myself. So it's no decision. That leaves it potentially. It could come back to my D-Day, but it also, because of that recommendation for, it could go to P&R committee. Okay. I wouldn't normally take any questions now, Councillor Mellor, but I'm going to allow you on this occasion, because I know you have an interest in this, to make a comment. But I have made my decision. Councillor Mellor.
Councillor Humby, that's fully understood. I did write a note previously saying what an excellent paper had been written in terms of background, but there's one or two items outstanding from the decision. If it is going to P&R, Policy and Resources, then I believe a bit more data is required for people to come to the correct decision. Could you just please clarify that West Berkshire, who claim to have a similar financial situation to ourselves, that West Berkshire are quite happy to take £180,000 a year, unquantified, unaccounted for this special privilege we've been giving to 4,800 households?
I can't really comment on that, can I? Because I don't know. All I can tell you is the leader has requested more data. That will be a discussion between him and the Borough Council, and you will appreciate that's the position I'm in at this stage. I hope, does that understand? Yes?
Yes, I won't be coming back with a supplementary then until after P&R.
Exactly, okay, but it still potentially could come back to a My D-Day as well. So the decision is no decision to leave those options open. Understand asked the question, but that's why I'm not taking a decision until more data, as the leader has asked for, it is being ascertained, and then those discussions happen, and then I will probably be able to give you a fuller picture of the questions that you've asked, Councillor Mellor.
Thank you.
Okay, so unless Stuart or Susie's going to tell me I've got to do something else, I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. Okay, thank you very much. So we're now going to go on to agenda item 8, the EIS European project funding. And I think Richard Kenny is going to present the paper.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm primarily going to take this paper as being read, but I will just say, just to help in terms of a quick summary, that some of you may recall that back in 2015 the County Council was successful in securing an Interreg project from Europe, which was all about encouraging SMEs to internationalise. That project has run its course, and the European process through the Interreg Secretariat has now thrown open a call for further additional activities, which is a call that all Interreg projects can submit to. So that includes the 286 projects that exist right across that programme, and there's about 20 million euros available, at which you can pitch up to 500,000. And as a result of that, this report simply seeks the approval for us to submit, to endorse those proposals and to make that bid, and then to really ensure that we've got the right delegated authorities to enter into the necessary funding arrangements and other arrangements, as well as deal with the implementation should we be successful. And I'll leave it there, Chairman.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Stuart, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that paper.
No.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think it's excellent that we're doing this. It's interesting reading some of the paper, some of the data in there about the 86,000 businesses, and 98% of those are MSEs. And I think that, that really stands out for me from that point of view, and the amount of business we're doing, and the £24 billion. It's really significant figures. So I'm very pleased to support the paper, and happy, Katie, to accept the recommendations as set out on page 75. Thank you, Katie. Okay. And then I think it's over to you again, Richard, for the Community Renewal Fund. So this is agenda item 9.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to say on this one, the Community Renewal Fund is really the precursor to the Shared Prosperity Fund, which we hope will be a much bigger and much more significant fund for Hampshire County Council moving forwards. And I think the fact that the government designated us as a lead authority was a very positive move, because it means essentially that, hopefully we'll be in the position of running the funding programmes for the future. So I think that's something really important to bear in mind. However, what I would say is that the process that we've entered into really has been quite a technical process, and it has been really to ensure that the bids that we've received have met the MHCLG criteria that they set, to ensure that when we passport those through to government to reach decisions, that we are satisfied that those bids are the right bids for us moving forwards, but also that if we were to enter into funding arrangements, that the risks associated with those funding arrangements could be properly handled with appropriate conditions. All I would say is that we received the 19 bids that are identified in the paper, and we've sifted those bids to reach a view about the ones we think meet the standard, which amounts to about eight particular bids. Mm-hmm. So that would reduce the funding ask from about 9 million down to about 3 million. We think that that's probably appropriate, because it shows that we've run the process properly, and that we're being quite measured about it. And as you well know, Hampshire is not in the top 100 places. Any of the districts are in that top 100, so we're not really identified as a priority. So we really are pushing uphill to get any resource out of this set of arrangements. So we kind of are where we are. Of those bids that we're suggesting move forward, there's a mix of things in there relating to skills, to enterprise, to culture, and indeed to climate change. So I think there's some real, good mix, good set of priorities, and we feel that those bids that we've selected are the ones that we could attach appropriate conditions to and enter into financial arrangements which will meet with the government's criteria. So I think the recommendations as set out are extremely helpful to us because it enables us to now submit those proposals and also secure those appropriate delegated authorities. And I'll leave it there, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Richard, very much for that. And it's interesting, isn't it? Well, thank you and your team for the work you've done on that, by the way. And absolutely agree with that approach. And yes, we are, it is an uphill struggle for us. But it's right that we are there, we are competing with it, and we are putting our case forward. And then we need to see what's around the corner as well. But it's interesting again, isn't it, that the fund is set up for investment in skills, businesses, communities in place. And yesterday, we launched the Hampshire story, and about 170 businesses, on that call, and the enthusiasm and all that about Hampshire. I did make the point that my family have been here 450 years, so you don't get much more Hampshire. But I'm very pleased to report that my local village has accepted me as a local now, so that's quite an achievement from that point of view. Look, this is good stuff, and thank you for the team, for the work you've done, as I say. So very, very happy to accept the recommendations as set out on page 83, Katie. Thank you. Okay, now, so that is the end of the first part of this session. We do have an additional agenda item, but we have to move into exempt session. So I'll read this piece out, Katie, if that's okay, then I'll leave you to make sure you manage who's on the call. So exclusion of the press and public, that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following item of business, as it is likely in the view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during this item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information within Para 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and further that, in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information for the reasons set out in the report. So, Katie, can I formally ask you that the webcast be stopped and await confirmation